Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor, and it's been a while since I made my last video because I was very busy the last months. I want to talk about tactical positions which might arise in the Alekhine. The Alekhine defense is a defense which is worthwhile learning for a serious tournament game. And I played this game here. This is a Blitz game, but it's a very instructive game, and I played against quite a high-rated FICS player. He pushed, and I played d6. This is the typical pawn break. Now, you might think that the Alekhine is too passive, but this game shows you how out of the positional lines that we can choose, very tactical possibilities can occur. So we take on d6 with the e pawn and not with the c pawn. This is very solid for black. Knight c3, the main move, and now knight c6 is the new move. Beforehand, bishop e7 was played. Bishop e7 was played, but then white can play bishop d3, and afterwards knight e2, and this is designed against the idea of black developing this bishop, because after bishop g4, f3 might be possible. So to not allow that bishop d3 idea, we play knight c6, and now bishop d3 isn't possible because simply the pawn would be hanging. Bishop e3, so the pawn is defended. Bishop e7 now, and bishop e2, and I played immediately bishop to f5. Let's just drop back. As the Alekhine player, you always have to think, how can you develop this bishop? You either can push to g4 or f5 according to circumstances. If the knight hops here, you can go to g4, you can go to f5 anyway, and after bishop e2, see that this g4 square is already denied black, so you have to go to f5 soon, before you are not allowed to move there. I mean, the next move could be queen here. Let's make it red, and the queen would guard the f5 square. White could then castle long, and you're gonna get very passive positions with your bishop hemmed in. So you wanna develop this bishop to f5 if g4 is taken away already. So this is why I played bishop f5 instead of castles here. Knight f3, I castled, white castled, and I played a waiting move like h6, because at any moment white could try to harass this bishop. It's white's idea to push the kingside pawns, which is recommended for white, and in order to not allow doing this by gaining time, I play h6, and after h3 I would now go bishop h7, not allowing to gain time with g4. So these are the only things you have to think about in the early stage of the game. The next thing you're gonna think about is pushing d5 after this bishop left c8, so that after c5 this knight can jump here, and later here, and later here, but you have to move the bishops out of the way. But we're gonna see something familiar in this game. I played h6 and white played b3, defending the c4 pawn with a pawn, so that white's pieces can do another job than just defending the pawns. Going back, my h6 move could have a downside which my opponent hasn't found in this Blitz game. Of course, this is the engine suggestion here. d5 is strong, and you have to be precise here as black. It's sometimes better to go backwards for the moment. Let's just see why. If we go knight e5, then takes, and c5 gives white the advantage. So just going back, we're going to b8. This is not a problem because this is a rather close position, and losing one tempo isn't that crucial like in an open Sicilian game. So with this d5 push, white has weakened these two squares, and we can head there with knight to d7 soon. So it's not the end of the world. Queen to d2 could be the next move. This is just a variation. Now the knight can come out, and if you wanna put your rooks on the queenside files and in the center to push this space gaining pawns somehow, then black can just put the rook on the open file, and after some moves here we can play a6, taking away active squares for white's knights. Maybe a3 now, and well, that would allow knight e5, attacking the c4 pawn twice, and then b3 would be forced. And then in this position you don't wanna open with a pawn break like c6 as black. So what you're gonna do is exchange pieces. You don't want to open the game because there is a lot of pressure. So you have to exchange pieces because you have a spatial disadvantage, and therefore queen c8 is a good move. Eyeing this diagonal, and the knight can hop there, trying to exchange off a white piece. And there's nothing white can do without doing funny moves such as f3 to prevent this. I mean, now the bishop here is worse, and this is just a senseless move. And even f4 just allows knight g5, g4, and the bishop has no retreat in this position. Going back to this position, this is a position, you know, with this pawn structure, which might occur in your own games, you know. This is typical if white pushes d5. What about b4? I think Blitz players would play that a lot as white without thinking. But then knight e5 shows you one of the tactical positions that might arise in the Alekhine middle game if your opponent is too overambitious. Now the pawn is attacked twice on c4, and I mean, if white wants to defend it, he's got to go backwards here. And if white thinks in blitz mode, you know, like pushing c5, then you see that black is crawling all over white's position. And if takes, you see that the queen already lacks squares This bishop does a nice job cutting the board into a half, and the knight takes away this square, the bishop takes away this square, the knight takes this square is taken. There's only these two squares for the queen, which is attacked, and say queen e1 for example, and now we just can exchange. And if queen takes, bishop g5 forking queen and rook there, and if pawn takes, bishop g5 anyway. And now we see what the idea of the Alekhine is. You playing solidly and wait for white to come to attack you, and if white plays not 100% accurately, you can often exploit this. Knight c2 would fail to bishop takes and check, and after the king moves, look at this, white's position is collapsing. If knight e4, bishop e6. Okay, this was a long variation after d5, which might occur. My opponent played b3. I played bishop f6, immediately taking advantage of the now weakened dark squared diagonal here, and as well giving my knight a retreat square to e7, which I, as an Alekhine player, always have in mind, because I want to push d5. But yeah, d5 here by white, I think it's not possible anyways, so I can play it first. Because of the takes, there would be a hanging rook. So rook c1, d5 before white gets to play d5, and this is the pawn push which Alekhine players try to make to free the position. And white has to go c5 if white wants to keep or wants to fight for the advantage. Taking the pawn just leads to exchanges, and that eases black's game. So c5, knight c8. And the idea of knight c8 instead of knight d7 is we want to go to f5, maybe exchanging that bishop or pressurizing this pawn. Okay. h3 was played, and now seeing g4 coming, maybe, I played bishop h7 because I learned from Grandmaster games that they never allow time gaining moves for the opponent. And now knight e1, trying maybe to prepare king side pawn pushes. Knight e7. Now you see that the bishop retreat liberated this square for the knight. g4 takes away the square from the knight, for the knight. But I mean, you are not compelled to go there. I played knight g6, immediately pointing my finger at the dark squares, which are weakened now. You see 1, 2, 3 pieces looking at h4, and that's a square near the king. Knight g2 was my opponent's idea, just to cover that square, but you see the pawns on queen and king side are pushed, and the rooks are not really actively placed, so there's not much I have to fear. Rook e8 and queen d2. So maybe white tries to get g5 in it somehow, but I think this is somewhat far off. I play a6 here to take away this active square from 2 white pieces at the same time. a6 is played anyway. If your opponent gets these pawn pushes in, then a6 is good, because then b5 would open up this rook's file. So a6 is not a bad move. f4. Well, this is somewhat weakening. And I played knight h4, and this is an okay move and a good move. But there was another possibility which had more chances for black. Taking on e3 with the rook. And this is what I meant with tactical opportunities by the positional idea in the Alekhine opening. Now you see, after recapturing on e3, black is threatening to take on d4 with the bishop, taking advantage of this weakened diagonal towards the king. So this is why the queen cannot take, and if knight takes, this is a variation. This is not what has been played, but a good example. Now you see that monster bishop in the middle of the board, pinning the knight on e3, and not only that, black is threatening to take one of the pieces here, and after queen or rook takes back, then to push with the pawn, and that pawn would fork two pieces here. So if f5 to close this bishop and attack the knight as a Zwischenzug, well, our threat doesn't run away and our knight gets just closer to the king. You see, the Alekhine idea is aggressive white play can often be punished. If knight d1 to protect e3, well, queen g5 now shows black's resources. Look at these nice squares. Sorry, that was a drunken arrow. It's just overwhelmingly strong for black, and there's nothing white can do. Look, this rook cannot come here to defend e3. This rook cannot come here. And if king h2 is the only thing that gets into your mind, rook e8 just increases black's grip in the on the position, and just is a bone-crushing move. So this is clearly one. Let's go back. So rook takes e3 would have been my move if I would play in a serious game and would have enough time to calculate it. I played very fast and played knight h4, again a good move, because rook takes e3 is still a threat, and I saw that, but I saw it while I played and not before I played moves. Here g5, and I took the knight on g2, and king takes. I mean, if takes, then simply takes. And probably that's being up a piece then. Okay, king takes, and I took with the h-pawn. Not necessarily here. Not necessary here. Pawn took, and now I finally played rook takes e3 under less strong circumstances for black, because the king is on g2 and not on this weakened diagonal anymore. If queen takes, then you see this nice fork. Oh, I'm sorry. and you see this nice fork. So in this position, black took on f6, and I retreated my rook, defending and attacking. You see the king is wide open because white pushed his kingside pawns. Bishop g4, attacking and defending himself. I took the pawn, takes, and I think black has a very reasonable position. You see both pawns here are attacked, but in fact white cannot take on d5 in this position. If rook e1, then the least black has is rook d8, and if takes, because of mate threatening, if I take on d5, then I can take on d4 instead, and this is quite an equal position. But in this position, after rook e1, knight b4 shows again an Alekhine resource. If rook e3, not allow the knight to come here, then knight c2 is the other possibility. And if rook e5, attacking the pawn on d5 twice, c6, and this is a very strong position for black. These pawns are fixed and not flexible, and I'm stronger on the king side, and this king is weak, and you see my bishop is very, very active in the center. In this position, my opponent just blundered by taking on d5. I played bishop e4 check, and white resigned. So to recap very quickly, you play first your knight out to c6, you then play bishop e7 with having the other bishop in mind when to develop it, and I've developed it now. And then you're gonna castle. h6 is one of the moves I like, even if my bishop is on g4 instead, because after h3 bishop can come here, g4 bishop comes here, g4 the bishop comes to g6, and if then knight h4 attacking my bishop, I can still retreat here and I keep the bishop pair. This is a little bit complicated from these arrows here. We can just drop back. Let's look at the other possibility. If knight here, if bishop g4 here, bishop here, castles, and h6 now, then h3, g4, and now that I played h6, I can retreat my bishop, and yeah, this is an okay position. I mean, in this position, of course, knight h4 isn't possible because black is watching over it, but it just gives you an idea in other lines that this mechanism with these pawn pushes and knight h4 doesn't necessarily win the bishop pair for white. Okay, let's go back to the game recapitulation. b3 I play immediately, bishop f6 and d5, the typical break. I retreat my bishop. Of course I have a little less space, so I have to maneuver a6, and now white just overextended his pawn structure and got under real pressure and lost nerves here. Okay, thanks a lot. Please comment and tell me your thoughts about it, maybe about your experience with the Alekhine, if you like it or not, and how you liked the video. Thanks.